This is the story of a revolution. It's the story of how Judaism came to the brink of extinction almost 2,000 years ago. But instead of dying out, it reinvented itself completely. And in so doing, changed the course of history. As our story begins, the Romans had occupied the land of Israel for a century, having seized power from the weak great-great-grandson of the heroic Maccabees, who had once fought off Greek control and gave us the holiday of Hanukkah. Every day, Roman rule was becoming more repressive and more cruel, and the Jewish population was deeply divided internally into competing factions. A catastrophe was clearly looming. In 66 CE, amid widespread protest against steep taxes, the Roman governor raided the temple treasury to pay off his personal debts. In response, a group of fanatically anti-Roman Jewish patriots, called zealots, attacked a garrison of Roman soldiers. This spark grew into a full-fledged wildfire of a war that lasted until 70 CE, when the Roman army laid siege to Jerusalem and destroyed most of it, including the temple. With the temple gone, the priesthood decimated, the dream of independence smashed, and so many people dead, it must have seemed that the Jewish story was coming to an end. And in fact, many Jews walked away forever. But then came the revolution. It began with a small cluster of survivors who, before the revolt, had belonged to a group called the Pharisees. The Pharisees, whose name means interpreters, had already started calling for a new kind of Judaism that was less centered on the temple and its hereditary priests. Now they had the opportunity. They stopped calling themselves Pharisees and adopted a new title. They began calling themselves teachers, or in Hebrew, rabbis. The Rabbinic Revolution that they launched reinvented Judaism completely for an era without a temple, without a priesthood, and without a homeland. It ushered in a Judaism that could be practiced by anyone, anywhere. They taught that while God had once desired burnt offerings in a particular building in Jerusalem, now God could be served through personal and communal words of prayer, through the never-ending discussion and debate over Torah, and through deeds of compassion and justice. They taught that religious leadership should be open to anyone. Well, any man at least. That took until the last century to change. But anyone who earned their position through learning, not through heredity. And they added a wide variety of new rituals to Jewish life that could be performed in one's own home and in a new kind of gathering place that they called synagogues. So many of the customs that we think of as essential to Judaism, from lighting candles on Friday night to Passover Seder, to signing a ketubah at a wedding or sitting Shiva for someone who's died, all of them come from their innovations. It's impossible to imagine Judaism without the traditions that they wove into its fabric. The record of the rabbis' discussions of Jewish law and practice formed the basis of their masterpiece, the Talmud. The Talmud's written in two parts, the earlier Mishnah and the later Gemara, composed over the span of 500 years and coming in at more than 5,000 pages. The Talmud weaves together legal arguments and folkloric legends with a smattering of some really bad medical advice, deep philosophical reflections, and truly quirky personal anecdotes. All in all, it covers every conceivable topic in Jewish life and then some. Holidays, prayers, ethics, marriage and divorce, criminal and civil law, what we should do first thing in the morning and last thing at night. In its pages, the rabbis lay out a comprehensive vision for a completely new kind of Jewish future. One might ask, who were these rabbis to so completely transform Judaism? Who gave them the go-ahead to reinterpret God's Torah, to change laws and add new rituals? The simple answer? Nobody. They just recognized that with the destruction of the temple, their whole world had changed. And rather than just meekly disappear from history, they would take what remained and rebuild it into something quite new. They told the following story to explain their actions, and it's one part screwball comedy, one part absolute heresy, and it's one of the most fascinating in all of Jewish literature. Once there was a rabbi named Eliezer, who, try as he might, couldn't convince the other rabbis that a particular type of oven was kosher. He tried every argument under the sun, but they wouldn't accept it. When he saw he couldn't persuade them with logic, he turned to miracles. "I am right," he said, "and the carob tree will prove it." And lo and behold, the tree lifted up in the air and moved 100 yards. The other rabbis were not impressed. They said, "We don't accept proof from trees." Frustrated, he tried again. "I am right, and the river will prove it." And the river started running backwards. "We don't accept proof from water," responded the rabbis. Getting into a full rage, Eliezer said, "I'm right, and the walls of the house of study will prove it." And the building began to rumble and shake until Rabbi Joshua stood up and calmly said, "Scholars are debating points of law here. You, walls, stay out of it." Finally, Eliezer turned to heaven and demanded that God weigh in. To everyone's surprise, that worked. The voice of God was clearly heard by all the assembled. "Eliezer is right. Stop arguing." Once again, Rabbi Joshua got to his feet and uttered some of the Talmud's most famous words. "Lo b'shamayim hi." The matter is not in heaven. He meant that since the Torah had been given to us, it's up to us to interpret it for ourselves. Not even God can say otherwise. Now, perhaps you might be thinking that this is a good time for a lightning bolt to come and strike Rabbi Joshua. But that's exactly not what happens. Instead, the Talmud records, God in heaven sat watching this whole exchange with a huge smile, chuckling and repeating, "My children have defeated me. My children have defeated me." Here's the point of the story. God isn't angry when we reinterpret tradition, even in surprising or unprecedented ways. God wants us to grow and find our own way, just as a good parent does for a child, even if that means doing things a little bit differently than either God or our parents might have imagined. Rabbi Elliot Dorff, the much-beloved rector of American Jewish University, offers an alternative explanation of the story's final words. He says that instead of translating them as, "My children have defeated me," you could also read them as, "My children have made me eternal. My children have made me live forever." It's a law of nature. That which stays the same will eventually die out. But things that evolve can go on and on and on. It's our capacity to look back at old texts and traditions and find new ways of understanding them that's been the secret to our survival. The Rabbinic Revolution is just one such example in a long history of our people's genius for reinvention.
Yeah.